Madam Chair, we are live streaming.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I appreciate it. Welcome back, committee members. Welcome back, public and executive branch. Chief King, we see you online as well. And Director Nesbitt, we will continue with topics with Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I believe we're looking at trophy animal predation reimbursement.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's what I'm tracking as well. And you know what? I'm just going to turn this straight over to Chief King, and he should be ready to go. It's pretty much an informational presentation, but we'll be glad to answer any questions or consider anything that the committee would like us to look at in the future, if this is going to become a topic for the rest of the interim.
Okay,
Thank
you. Very good. So committee will address Chief King. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chairwoman Ellis and members of the committee. My name is Rick King. I'm Chief Game Warden for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of the department's damage claim program. And then towards the end, I'll zero in on our trophy game predation claims. So many states have not assumed any liability for damage caused by wild game animals, but Wyoming has, and that limited liability is assumed through state statute, specifically in Title 23 under 23-1-901. And the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission has promulgated regulations to carry out the legislature's intent found in that section. And those regulations are found in our Chapter 28 of the Game and Fish Commission rules. So wildlife damage is a major component of the department's wildlife management program. And I'll step you through the process that a landowner or a producer would use when addressing damage with the department. So when a landowner or a producer discovers damage to their crop or livestock, they would first notify their local game warden or a regional wildlife supervisor or a member of the Game and Fish Commission. Upon notification, our local game wardens will investigate the damage claim, and if possible, they'll attempt to mitigate that damage. So for example, if a producer was suffering problems with deer on an alfalfa field, our game wardens would respond and try to haze those animals off. They do that through various techniques. And as another example, if the reported damage was caused by a trophy game animal, our folks would respond and investigate and potentially try to trap and remove that offending animal to stop the damage. But once the damage is either mitigated or it ends, then our game wardens work closely with landowners and producers to file a claim for the damages that were suffered. The department considers those claims and recommends payment based on the investigation of our field folks. And in recent years, we've averaged about 150 to 200 claims per year. And of those, nearly all of them are paid, with about 80 to 90% of them are paid in full. In the last 10 years, the department's paid anywhere from about $500,000 to about $1.4 million annually in those damage claims. And we use funds that are collected or generated from resident and non-resident application fees. So at the time a person applies for a license, they pay a fee in addition to their license fee that we then put aside to pay for these damage claims. And in most years, the money collected by those fees covers our damage claims, but in some years it doesn't. And in that case, we use other license revenues to pay for the damage payments. So most recently, during the last legislative session, we did hear from Representative Rodriguez-Williams from Park County about some concerns she had been hearing from some of her constituents. And at the same time, we heard from Mr. Jim McGagna, the Executive Vice President of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, about similar concerns that he was hearing from his constituents. Both Representative Rodriguez-Williams and Mr. McGagna had the opportunity to talk to our commission, the Game and Fish Commission, back in April at their Jackson meeting, and brought forth those concerns. And based on what they brought forward, the commission directed me to take a look at our trophy game damage compensation system and see if there are some modifications that we should make within our Chapter 28 Game and Fish Commission rules and regulations. And the issue that specifically came up is that in areas where we are paying trophy game damage, we use formulas to pay the claim. So for example, in an area where we know there are grizzly bears, we will pay up to 3.5 times the confirmed loss to a producer for calves and for sheep. I think the sticking point that was brought up is that multiplier that we use to pay those claims is only applied to calves and sheep, and we don't apply it to yearlings or adult livestock, adult cows. We do for sheep, but not for cows. And I think some of the producers are concerned that that doesn't adequately compensate them for some of their losses. So just briefly, the reason that we use those multipliers is that we know once a producer turns out on the open range that they're not going to be able to find all of their depredated calves or sheep. We know that some are going to die in remote, rugged places where their riders aren't going to find them. We also know that some of them are going to be consumed so quickly that there wouldn't be much left to find. And so that's why we've developed those multipliers over the years. So based on the discussion that we had at our April commission meeting, my staff is currently looking into information to see whether or not an adjustment to those multipliers for yearling livestock is warranted at this time, and we'll bring that recommendation back to the commission for their consideration. So with that, I'll stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief King. Committee questions for Chief King? Yes, Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chief King, in your opinion, is there any way to, or have you had an opportunity to visit with the feds as far as them compensating for some of this loss due to grizzly bears and wolves?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Winter. So currently the department incurs all the expenses for grizzly bears, which, as you well know, are currently listed on the Endangered Species Act. And at this time, there is no program from the federal level to reimburse any producers for losses due to grizzly bears. That's being entirely borne by the state right now.
Follow up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Chief King, have you made an attempt to get some help from the feds at all, or is there something we need to do to enhance that?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Winter, we've not made a formal request to the feds to pay for compensation. It's something that I think we could consider, you know, as the debate rages on about delisting these species and the expenses. I do think that's a conversation that should be had, is you know, at what point do we look to others to help pay the bill for the losses that our producers are suffering.
Director Nesbitt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Winter, we haven't written down and sent them a letter with a formal request. We've had multiple discussions over decades now about what they are willing to do. It goes clear back to when wolves were introduced. There was a lot of discussion then, and they weren't willing to look at it. Now there is a federal program that was initiated a couple, 3 years ago. It hasn't come with any money yet, but if it came with money, it would provide some, in very limited circumstances, some compensation on specifically animals that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, but none of that's come to fruition yet.
Follow up.
Thank you, Director. Then the answer is to get them delisted again.
the answer, the right answer for the state of Wyoming is that they're delisted. That is the best answer.
Yeah, hopefully our federal delegation can get that accomplished, but it doesn't look real promising. So,
The current political environment would indicate to me anyway that it doesn't look real feasible in the next couple of years.
well, I don't envy you.
So Director Nesbitt, I don't understand the legalities of how the federal government can impose an animal on us and we bear the cost of that animal, even though we have said it meets the criteria for delisting. I don't understand how they can continue to force Wyoming to bear that cost. Can you explain that to me?
I wish I could, but I can't explain it either. And I don't think that the federal government looks at any species of wildlife, regardless of their legal status, as being their responsibility to take care of damages on private property. They just simply don't. They don't talk that way. They don't act that way. And I don't believe that they think that's within their responsibility. I will say this, though. I'm glad that the state of Wyoming does the right thing, because it's the right thing to compensate producers for their losses due to these. And they don't have any ability to, I shouldn't say they don't have any ability. They have limited abilities to mitigate the damage. And a lot of our producers go to great lengths to try. I mean, they've done things like hire additional people, and they change their cattle operations to try to mitigate damage. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot they can do, and there's no way for us to manage these species. So I'm glad we do what we do, though. I think it's the right thing.
Well, I know, we appreciate that. and Producers appreciate that as well. It's frustrating, and it's not just a trophy game, it's protected birds and the land, the sheep industry. Questions? I digress. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Question I have, I guess it's either for Mr. King or Director Nesbitt. Just wondering where we are with numbers with the Grizzlies and what do we have to get to in order for the feds to take a look at delisting? Thank you.
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. So we've currently been estimating grizzly bear numbers in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem to be between 700 and 750 bears. But most recently, we've enhanced through some better science our ability to estimate that population, and our current estimates are just over 1,000 bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So this is, as Director Nesbitt said, this is a fully recovered population. It's a population that has done extremely well since they were listed, and all of the efforts that have been carried out by the state, by folks who live and recreate in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem should be proud of the fact of recovering that species. So in short, they're doing very well, and our current estimate is just over 1,000 bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
if
sir.
I may add to Senator Schuler, this is not a biological issue. And the federal government will admit that it's not a biological issue. It's more about technicalities with what happens when they're not listed anymore that continue to get litigated and continue to hang up delisting rules. The grizzly bear has been proposed for delisting under the George W. Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration. And all three times litigation has thwarted the effort. The most recent court decision has put us right back in the same boat, where we're back trying to find a way not to deal with the biology and the science of bears. All the science for 20 years has indicated they're recovered fully. It's more about these other complexities that courts continue to find problems with.
Thank you both. Oh, Representative Jennings, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairwoman, Director, or Mr. King, either one. So I'd like to move it a little bit. The bullet point says trophy animal predation reimbursement. So I have a constituent up in the northern part of the state, and he raises pumpkins on a large scale. And I guess it's part of the hunting deal, because people go out there and hunt for these pumpkins. And antelope and deer are very destructive to that. And I know that he has reached out and worked with you guys some, and there's been back and forth, good, and I think he thinks bad at times, but I was thinking about that across our state, and there's a ton more producers than just cattle or lambs that have lots of people that are getting into niche farming and things of that. So I'm sure you guys have had this discussion. What's that going to look like 5 years, 10 years out? Because, somebody can come in with an acre of asparagus. I don't know if deer like asparagus, but they can get wiped out pretty quick in some of these niche farms. And are you guys, do you have a plan beyond where we are today? Because clearly there's a lot of people moving into this state. They want to get away from where they came from, but they are producers also. And so I'm just curious what your outlook is 3 years, 5 years. It's been cattle and sheep, but it's not always going to be that.
Director Nesbitt?
I'll go ahead and take a crack at that. So Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, so the damage we have focused today a lot on the big toothy critters. But actually in the beginning and what has continued throughout, we've actually had more damage in the past related to stored crop or growing crop damage. And so the same rules apply. Basically, if somebody does experience damage, they can file a claim. They got to notify us. We go out and try to mitigate it. But then we can, one of the best examples of where we go out and actually measure it is in cornfields. And we have damage up in the northwest part of the state and even sometimes in other places that produce corn. And so we try to do the same exact thing, compensate the producer, the farmer, for whatever they lost. You're right, though. There are some very niche, but the pumpkin example is a perfect one. And that's a very difficult one to deal with because it's large enough you can't just fence it. But it's, he can produce a lot of product in a small area. And so I don't know the recent details on what our folks have done specifically in that situation, but I can tell you that over time, our program has evolved to use new techniques to try to deal with it. Obviously, prevention's always better than just paying a claim. I mean, no producer, whether you're raising sheep, cattle, or corn or alfalfa, raises it to go and get a check from the government. They raise it because they want to sell it on the open market. And so we continue to work with producers. I'll tell you, I'm more worried. The short term for me worry is this year, because this is going to be the second year in a row of drought. Every time we have low precipitation year across the state, it increases damage. And a lot of our producers get a double whammy because they have less forage. A lot of folks farm and ranch, and they lose forage for their livestock because it's drier. And at the same time, the wildlife all come to the most lush and wettest areas, which are where they're growing crops. And it's a significant problem if you're a farmer and rancher in Wyoming. And we compensate for that, and we do the best we can to work on prevention with those producers across the state. The future, you're right. It's hard to predict what this might look like with some of those niche commodities, but I do have confidence that we've developed some pretty cool new techniques to deal with some of that, and I'm hopeful we can apply that to whatever may come down the path for us in the future.
And Director Nesbitt, you have the authority within the commission to address some of those niche markets. I know we've had bears get into honey apiaries or bee apiaries. And so if they report that damage immediately, are they allowed damage reimbursement?
Madam Chair, short answer is yes. And beehives are covered under the current damage regulation, and the legislature has given the commission authority to determine which types of property damage that they can compensate for. And so they do have some latitude there to deal with things that may come down the road that we just can't foresee. But beehives are currently covered right now.
And same would apply then to pumpkin patches then?
Oh, yes, the pumpkin patch example does work. Some of the challenges we have is, the commission has adopted a regulation that requires the landowner to allow hunting to try to help mitigate the problem. And that's a requirement. And sometimes that is where the conflict comes is between that, the landowner providing hunting access. And even more common, it's becoming more common, I should say, is that the neighbor doesn't allow any kind of hunting, a way to help out the neighbor. You know, we've got an example in the Matitsi area where non-resident landowner has, you know, literally an elk population that's grown from 50 to as many as 700 to 1,000 elk, doesn't have a lot of interest in harvesting any of those elk. And so all the neighbors get to deal with the brucellosis and the damage. And so that's a continual challenge. I was on a phone call this morning with the producer up in the northeast part of the state about this very issue. And it's a challenge that we gotta try to work through.
And full disclosure, I mean, we take advantage of that, not only with our row crops, specifically corn, and we do get damage payment for damage done by deer. The warden comes in and he assesses that, and he takes, God bless him, because he's got to do that during the hunting season. And he takes hours walking through and checking that damage. A crane can do just as much damage. As soon as you put your seed in the ground, it starts to come up and you can just watch the cranes go right down the row and pluck those right out of the ground. But Game and Fish will come in with some of those techniques that he's spoken of, like the goofy little flyers that are in front of a auto dealership or whatever. They'll bring in those, they'll bring in noise bombs to go off, and my little corgi dog's about as effective. So anyway, the struggle is real.
Madam Co-Chair,
Yes.
I don't quite understand those. Could you maybe demonstrate?
We call them Super
props.
Gumby.
You call them what?
Super Gumby.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Madam Chair, I think Director Nesbitt just volunteered, so.
Okay, yes, did you have a follow-up?
I didn't until you got to that, Madam Chairman. So I certainly don't want to disparage the department, because they have worked hard on the pumpkin patch idea, and the new techniques have not convinced the antelope and the deer as much as they'd hoped. But the thing about the niche part of that is that part of what you're doing, I mean, it's not just the crop. In the pumpkin thing, it's the ambiance of, you know, they take people out there, and so that's what I was talking about in the niche part of that is that, you know, for the beef producer or lambs, it's go out and there's depredation. But here now there's a new component with the niche part of it, that part of what they're selling, part of their production is the ambiance or the experience for the customer. And so, you know, these particular people, they've done very well at that, but they've seen some times where they're, you know, like you said, the drought, and then this exacerbates that. And so it's a different dynamic. And as we get more niche things in, I think you're going to see more of that. I don't see how you're not going to. So that was
I would agree.
Thank you. Well, shall we move on?
That's the pleasure of the committee. We are
Disposal
to
of
talk
game
about
carcass. Yeah. and-
carcasses. And again, Chief King.
Thanks, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So I'll make this discussion, at least on my end, fairly brief, and then allow you to ask any questions that you might have for me. So certainly in discussions that we have had over a long time regarding chronic wasting disease, we've discussed how important it is to ensure that folks have the opportunity to dispose of deer, elk, and moose carcasses properly. And of course, the best method of disposal is for those carcasses, especially the spine and brain to end up in a landfill. And the reason why that's so critical is that, as we've discussed, CWD is a unique disease. It's a prion disease. So unlike a bacteria or a virus, where after some amount of time out in the environment, those agents no longer are infectious, prions can remain infectious for a long time in the environment. And so in the name of trying to reduce or eliminate the amount of contamination that's out there on the landscape, it's prudent and a good practice for us to ensure that those parts of those species end up in a landfill. And we had quite a few of those discussions regarding some legislation this past session. So of course, you know, from a good, better, and best perspective, it's good if carcasses remain where they were harvested, or at least those parts of the carcass that we know can be highly infectious, the brain and spinal column. It's better if they end up in a landfill, and then even best yet if they're handled at the landfill, either through incineration or composting. And so thanks to Deputy Chief Scott Edberg, who has compiled a lot of information and done a lot of work in this regard, we sent all of you several documents. One was quite lengthy that outlines some of the work that we've helped facilitate in terms of carcass disposal. And I think the take-home message that I'd just leave with you is just simply that it is important for our sports persons to have the ability to process their carcass and then place those the remnants off into a landfill. We have some great examples of some interagency cooperation in that regard. DEQ has been very helpful and very responsive to working with us, and each year for the last 2 years in their budgeting, they've set aside money to help landfills establish some programs, whether it's providing dumpsters out in communities or even potentially setting up compost programs at their landfills. There hasn't been too many folks that have jumped on board that program yet, but DEQ has made those funds available, and I appreciate the legislature's support of including those funds in DEQ's budget request. So with that, I know you received a ton of information, and again, the simple take-home message is that it's important for us to have a ready, available method for folks to deposit carcasses into landfills. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chief King. Questions, committee, or thoughts? Chairman Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I was looking through the materials and I don't know that I saw it. What is the penalty for someone who's found illegally dumping a carcass?
Chief King?
Madam Chair, Senator Ellis, I apologize. I don't have that in front of me. I was on the spot with AIS, but I am not with that. But I will look that information up and be sure to send it to you.
Thank you. It's most of everything, just our previous conversation and this one too, it's just the rule breakers. You know, I told Chairman Ellis before I came down here, I addressed a group of girls who were headed to Girls State, and I was telling them about our interim topics. And one of the girls had said, you know, I go for a walk outside of Shell, and there is a location there in a draw where people just dump their carcasses. And I'm sure that happens all over the state, but it's impossible for your department to be there on top of that when that happens and to catch those people.
Yeah, one of the things, Madam Chair, that we did to try to address that is to go to, because it was difficult for some of our citizens around the state to, some landfills started to stop taking carcasses, or they would require body bags and those kind of things. And so what we chose to do is to start with the landfills and to work with them to see what help they might need to feel more comfortable taking those carcasses. And that was a big multi-agency effort. We had Department of Ag and DEQ. We invited the county commissioners to be involved in the municipalities, and we actually did a summit. We brought all of them together and talked about all this, and we did develop those best practices that you all received before the meeting here through that process. But that's been our approach to this point, because if people don't have a place to take it, it gets ditched on the side of the road or out on the 2-track on the BLM somewhere. And so, and you know, that continues to happen. And the other thing that I think is important to note is that animals that have CWD naturally die every day. And so there are animals out on the landscape that are shedding prion through natural processes that are beyond people just dumping carcasses.
Okay, thank you. Committee, thoughts or questions? Okay, we'll move on. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just going to anecdotally tell you why I am interested in this. The other day I was at my kid's soccer practice and it's north of town and they have the big dumpster and I was throwing out some garbage, waiting for her to get done. And I saw a carcass in the disposal and I did call just Cheyenne PD and asked, do I need to report something? You know, and that's kind of what prompted me to just want to understand this better because they said, no, it's fine. There's no law prohibiting that. And that didn't quite make sense to me. So I was just wondering if you have tracks or if we have any information that municipalities provide about how often they see this, or if we even collect data of how prevalent of a problem that is in dumping carcasses in public places like that. I'm just kind of curious if you have any info or if anyone from our municipalities groups are listening, we can follow up.
Director.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair. So, we do know that one of the issues that the municipalities deal with is that people who don't have the means to dispose of a carcass have carcass in their yard. And I know some of the bigger municipalities are really good about being responsive to that. We in smaller communities oftentimes respond and help people with those kind of things. As far as the amount of dumping in inappropriate places or like in dumpsters and that kind of stuff, I can tell you that every year during hunting season, it's pretty common and happens all the time. Outside of that, we don't hear complaints from the municipalities about that, but I'm sure it happens. I mean, and luckily in this community, there's not a whole lot of deer in town that are dying in people's backyards, but there are some places that have a lot of that go on regularly.
All right, we'll move on. Update on the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force.
All
Director.
right, thank you, Madam Chair. So our first meeting is scheduled for June 16th and 17th in Casper. So to this point, the group hasn't really done anything yet. The purposes for this first meeting will be to get everybody introduced to one another, and then really probably the core of the first meeting is to have the entire group determine what topics they're going to tackle over the next 12 to 18 months. So that was very important from the early parts. We certainly weren't given the charge for the Game and Fish just to come up with a long list of things for these people to study. We felt strongly that those that were interested in the task force from the beginning, one of them was Senator Driscoll, we felt strongly that everybody had to have input into what topics they would study at. We certainly have a list that we're going to recommend, and I know many of the other members of the task force will do the same. We decided to delay the start because when the task force was formed in December, that was right at the time when the legislature was grappling with all of the big challenges that you all just went through. And we felt like to make sure that we had good engagement and we didn't stack too many things on the legislative members' plates on the committee, that we'd push it off till June and after the session. And so that's why it's starting in June. We did, in the interim though, we've sent out a few videos on just factual information on things we know the task force may be interested in. Most of them are just videos of our people explaining a process. And so that's kind of where it stands. Not much has happened yet because they haven't even had their first meeting. The task force members, I've met with most of them. They're very interested in this having a significant role for public involvement. And so we're building that into the agenda. We have hired a facilitator to help facilitate the meetings. The group will have the opportunity at the first meeting to elect a chair. And so all of those things are still to come, but by the next time we meet, this committee meets, we'll be able to tell you what came out of the first meeting. And by then there probably have been 2 meetings. So.
Thank you, Director. And committee, if you have any thoughts on ideas for the task force, please express them to, I'm on that task force. So if you've got some ideas, I'm happy to hear them as residents and as sportsmen. That's important. If you've heard anything from your constituency, let me know. Let the director know. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Director, That's the 17th and 18th of June, or 16th and 17th?
What's in my brain is the 16th and 17th. I'll double
Okay.
confirm that for you.
And then that'll be at the Game and Fish office in Casper.
It's in Casper. Do you know the location, Sarah? Where? It's at the Hilton Garden Inn.
Okay.
And it is. It's the 16th and 17th.
Hilton Garden Inn.
It'll be, and just for clarification, the meeting will be June 16th and 17th, the first meeting at the Hilton Garden Inn in Casper.
Okay.
Will that be virtual as well?
We're going to make that available. It will be broadcast online.
Okay,
I think the task force members are all intending to be there in person. With one exception that I've heard of that has a conflict that's going to appear online, but most of them will be there in person.
And Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I could, so it'll be open to the public and transparent, because I've seen online some disparaging comments from one of the sportsmen's groups, if you can call them that. So I just was curious process and all of that.
Madam Chair, Representative Sweeney. So yes, this is intended to have broad public engagement for anybody who wants to weigh in. There was a lot of interest in being selected to be members on the group. And we wanted to keep the group as small as we could. But all those other folks are welcome to be there and be part of the discussion. One of the things that I'm going to recommend to the group is that public comment occurs. It's not a typical meeting where there's discussion and decisions all day long, and then at the end of the day, there's public comment. I think the interest of the group from those that I've talked to is, there's public comment at multiple points throughout the meeting, and it's fairly informal. And so even opportunities for them to engage during the discussion. But yes, open, full, transparent. There has been a group that has delivered inaccurate information. And I would just encourage folks to make sure that they look at communications that are coming either out of the governor's office or the Game and Fish to get the facts on what's really going on with this task force.
I agree. Don't believe everything you read on social media. Yes, sir, Senator Landon.
Madam Chairman, I think that's the same group that might have toilet papered my house for that, for that vote. Yeah.
We're coming after you, Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If members of the public want to participate and get meeting notices and updates, how can they do that?
So we are, the Game and Fish is putting out, and we've just got the agenda done. It's just going out here soon. All that will be disseminating to our lists. And then also we're creating a public repository for everything through our website where people can obtain information that way. And then certainly anybody that contacts us and says, hey, I want updates, we've got a list, and we'll be providing all the information on the task force through those lists.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions on the task force group? Okay, we'll move on. Elk feed grounds and public engagement.
All right, so this is another public engagement process that we're right in the middle of. I updated the task force here a couple months, or I'm sorry, I updated the committee here a couple months ago on the first phase of that. And really the first phase was just fact gathering and opinion gathering from really anybody who wanted to come learn about feed grounds and then give us some feedback on what their impressions are. This next phase that we'll be entering here in this summer, the plan and the groundwork's all laid for that will be a series of several public meetings where both diverse groups will be able to participate and discuss the issues around feed grounds, as well as individual groups that are like-minded. So that what we heard from a lot of folks is that they are concerned with expressing all their views when with a lot of people in the room that are opposed. And so those opportunities will be there, but we'll also let sportsman groups have their own conversations together with us there to help and provide information. Outfitting groups, environmental groups, landowners. And so that folks have an opportunity to engage maybe in a place they feel a little bit more comfortable talking about their specific issues. This will all lead to the development of a long-range plan, a recommendation that we'll take to the commission on, what the future of feed ground management looks like in the state. One of the things, and I've said this to this committee before, that some folks looked at this as a feed ground closure process. That is not what this is at all. This is focused on what's the best thing to do in the face of all these complexities that revolve around elk management in Northwest Wyoming. All the issues with 2 different diseases, brucellosis and CWD, issues with federal agencies, and we feed on 8 different feed grounds that are on forest. We feed on others that are on BLM, and then there's the National Elk Refuge. So anyway, the outcome of this is allow people to understand all sides of the issue and how Game and Fish has made the decisions we have to this point, and then help us figure out what we need to do for the long term. And the hope is that maybe we'll come up with some solutions that will work for everyone that's involved, for everyone that has a stake in this issue. And we'll continue as this thing moves on to update the legislature as we go.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, do we still feed anything except the elk at this point?
Director.
Madam Chair, Senator Landon, no, we do not. Back in the day when you were up in that neck of the woods, I think we had some moose feed grounds left. We don't have any moose feed grounds, no deer feed grounds or anything else. It's just all elk right now.
We did. It was a little discomforting when you had 125 moose around you and your snow machine didn't start. Fortunately, they were more interested in the alfalfa hay than they were the snow machine, but yeah, thank you. I was just curious if we still.
One exception to that is on the National Elk Refuge, they do also feed bison.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
That's a Pinedale problem. Further comments, questions? Yes, Senator Guru, or a Jackson program or problem rather.
Yeah, you knew it was coming. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, I know we're going to have a robust discussion on this subject in various sites around. Have we set dates and locations for those meetings?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, we have, and if those have not come out publicly yet, they will be very shortly. I'm going to look to my PIO. Are they out now? I just saw the final set of dates within the last few days, so it's coming very, very soon.
Okay. Oh, we'll look forward to that. If you could send me a copy, I'd help.
Yeah, if you could send that to the committee. that
The
would be
committee
great.
will make sure the committee gets a copy of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Further comments or questions, committee? Okay, moving right along. Update on Endangered Species Act litigation. Special Assistant AG. Please come on down. I do feel like a game show host. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For those of you I don't know, and there are several that I don't, my name is Jay Jurdy. My working title with the Attorney General's Office is Special Projects Attorney. And I am here today because one of my current projects is some litigation that has an Endangered Species Act issue. So they figured I could just update you on the what we have going in terms of litigation that has at least one ESA issue involved in it. So does the committee have a preference on how or what I talk about in that regard?
No, Mr. Jurdy, if you would just dive right into it, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so currently the state of Wyoming is involved in 5 cases that have at least one Endangered Species Act issue. So what I will do is walk you through each of the cases in no particular order and just tell you basically what the case is about, what the ESA issue is, and where that case is status-wise in terms of progress. And so the first case I will talk about is a case where two different groups of conservation groups filed separate lawsuits. Those lawsuits were consolidated into one suit going forward. And they are challenging what's called the Upper Green River Rangeland Project. And this project authorizes livestock grazing in an area of the Bridger Teton National Forest. So the lawsuits were originally filed out in federal district court in the District of Columbia. While the cases were in the District of Columbia, one of the groups of plaintiffs moved for a preliminary injunction for last grazing season. And what they wanted was basically either no killing of grizzly bears in the project area during the grazing season. And if I remember right, they may have asked, well, no, that was it. They wanted the permittees not to trail their cattle through an exclosure at Kendall Warm Springs. But I believe there was an agreement outside of the litigation that didn't happen. So ultimately, the court in DC denied the preliminary injunction and then subsequently transferred the case to federal district court in Wyoming. So as we sit here today, these cases are in Wyoming, and the basic issues are, the basic ESA issues are both groups of plaintiffs are challenging what's called an incidental take statement relative to the project. Because there are grizzly bears in the area, the Forest Service was required to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service to see if the grazing might affect grizzly bears. It was determined that it might adversely affect grizzly bears in the area. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service produced what's called a biological opinion. And in that biological opinion, Fish and Wildlife Service evaluated what impacts the grazing would have on the bears, and ultimately determined that over a 10-year period of time that a total of no more than 72 grizzly bears could be killed incidental to the grazing activities. So basically, the way it works is when the cattle are grazing, if a bear comes in and takes a calf or kills a cow, the bear has to do that multiple times and it will be deemed a nuisance bear. And when it's deemed a nuisance bear, then it can potentially be taken through lethal take. And so this incidental take permit allows that to happen 72 times over a 10-year period of time. The groups have sued and said that the service didn't do the right biological analysis. They've argued that it threatens the continued recovery of the bear if that many bears are taken. A second ESA issue that only one of the groups of plaintiffs is pursuing basically says that the Forest Service should have engaged in a formal consultation and created a biological opinion to address the impacts of cattle trailing up to the project on the Kendall Warm Springs dace, which is a very small fish that lives in between where the cattle start at the beginning of the grazing season and how they get up to on the path they take up to the grazing area. And then there's a third issue that was added to the case once it was transferred to Wyoming that has to do with the National Forest Management Act. Where we're at in this case, the administrative record has been filed in the case, and there are disputes over whether that record's complete. And so we're working through those disputes. The briefing on the merits has not begun. The second lawsuit is filed in the Northern District of California. Looks like 7 conservation groups have sued the federal government over 3 sets of revisions that the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service made to the regulations that implement the Endangered Species Act. In the 3 sets, one set, the regulations had to do with designation of critical habitat and delisting. In the second set, the regulations had to do with prohibitions that automatically apply if a species is listed. And the third set had to do with the formal consultation process. And basically what these groups are arguing is that before these revisions took place, that the 2 services should have followed a NEPA process, which if you're not familiar with NEPA, if you've heard the phrase environmental impact statement, That is a byproduct of one type of NEPA process. And here they think an EIS should have been done. The second issue, basically, they're saying that the two services didn't properly tell the public what they were going to do in terms of revisions during the rulemaking process. So the federal rulemaking process is somewhat similar to the state rulemaking process. You put your proposed rule out there and you let the public comment on it, and then you possibly make some changes to the rule before it moves forward. Here, they're basically saying that the final rules that were adopted didn't really look like the proposed rules that were put out there, and they say that was an error. And the third issue has to do with, they're basically saying some of the rule changes just exceed the authority or the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. So the state of Wyoming is an intervener in this case with a number of other states. Alabama is the lead state on this one. And so to give you, by comparison, in the Upper Green River project case, the state of Wyoming intervened and what we have called the group of ranchers, which is a number of either ranch owners and then also the Wyoming Stock Growers Association have also intervened separately in that Upper Green River case. But state of Wyoming is doing all of its briefing on its own. In this ESA regs case out in California, we're in with all of these other states, and we'll do a group brief with them when it gets to the merits briefing. Okay, the third case has to do with the Crow Creek Pipeline Project. Right now, apparently, the town of Afton gets all of its natural gas trucked in. And so the Crow Creek Pipeline Project is going to build a natural gas pipeline from southern Idaho up to Afton to provide a more consistent, reliable supply of natural gas. Two different conservation groups have got together to challenge the Forest Service's authorization of this project. And this case is in the Federal District of Idaho. The state of Wyoming has intervened in the case to defend the decision, and the Lower Valley Energy Company, who's the gas supplier, has also intervened. And so there are 8 issues in this case, but really only 2 of them are ESA issues. I mentioned the biological opinion earlier in relation to the Upper Green River project case. A less formal type of assessment that the Fish and Wildlife Service can do when a project might affect a listed species is called a biological assessment. And so in this pipeline project case, the Forest Service talked with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service did the Forest Service ultimately did a biological assessment. And so the plaintiff groups here are saying that in that biological assessment, 3 species that may be in the area weren't considered. Those 3 species are grizzly bears, the lady's tresses orchid, and the yellow-billed cuckoo. And so basically they're saying you didn't do the biological assessment correctly. The second ESA issue, the plaintiffs groups are saying the Forest Service erred by not considering the possible effects of the project on adjacent critical habitat for the lynx. Apparently there's some lynx critical habitat east of where the pipeline's going to run. And the plaintiffs groups are saying that should have been considered in the biological assessment. In this particular case, the administrative record was filed on May 7th. If you're not familiar with how these cases typically work, when you challenge a federal agency action, something by the Forest Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service, the case centers around the administrative record, and the administrative record is all of the documents that the agency considered during its decision-making process leading up to the decision that's being challenged. And so when a lawsuit is filed, the first step in the case is getting the administrative record together and getting it filed. So here, they just got the administrative record filed. The briefing schedule is set. The briefing should be concluded on October 18th of this year. But I can tell you from experience, they never stick to the original schedule. So there's a high likelihood that actually it will be later this year before the briefing is done. Fourth case that the state is involved in, There was a lawsuit filed in federal district court in Montana by one conservation group. And in this lawsuit, the conservation group basically challenged the Fish and Wildlife Service because the service had not done a status review on grizzly bears since 2011. And the ESA says you're supposed to do one at least every 5 years. And then they also challenged the service's recovery plan for grizzly bears, basically saying it isn't good enough because it doesn't account for other areas where bears might be able to be recovered. And they also think it doesn't account for the conservation and survival of bears. And so in this case, the federal defendants in the case twice tried to get it dismissed, and the court said no, but then the parties filed motions for summary judgment, which in these types of cases, they're always decided on summary judgment where everybody looks at the administrative record, writes a brief saying this is how the law applies to how the decision was made. Here, what the court found was that the federal government and the interveners should prevail because there was no legal mechanism for the conservation groups to bring this type of challenge and raise the issues that they raised. And so that decision was issued on December 23rd, 2020. The groups subsequently appealed that decision. And currently that case is in the Ninth Circuit mediation process, which is a mandatory process when you take an appeal into the Ninth Circuit. In that case, we have 3 sets of interveners. The state of Wyoming intervened, the state of Idaho intervened. And then as a group, we had the Wyoming Stock Growers, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, and the Utah Farm Bureau Federation. So the last case is what I call the second grizzly bear delisting case because it's the second time I've worked on a grizzly bear delisting case. But this is the case that was decided last year, arising out of the 2017 rule that delisted grizzly bears in the Yellowstone distinct population segment. So with this case, I guess, I mean, if you'd like some more detailed background about what the issues were on appeal, I mean, the bottom line is the district court ruled in favor of the many conservation groups who challenged the rule on 3 different issues. The state and all of the other defendants and intervener defendants appealed that decision to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit basically affirmed the district court and put grizzly bears back on the list. I mean, that's the short version. I can provide more detail about the issues, or I will say when the 2017 delisting rule was issued, it spawned 6 lawsuits challenging it. All of those lawsuits then were consolidated in federal district court in Montana, which is why then the appeal went up to the Ninth Circuit.
Thank you. Questions, committee? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Sir, in your litigation process, and I'm referring mostly to the Upper Green River case that you're talking about, is there ever any discussion about the benefits of grazing versus wildfire? Would that be something you could incorporate into your case?
Madam Chairman, Representative Winter, at this point, my answer is I'm not sure. With the original claims that were brought, which were based upon the biological opinion and the potential impacts of grazing on the grizzly bear and the dace, I think it would have been difficult to find a way. But since the case has been transferred to Wyoming, one of the groups of plaintiffs has raised a National Forest Management Act based claim. And I'm not exactly sure where they're going with that, but that claim is directed more at grazing itself as opposed to the impacts of grazing on the species. And so that might be a place where that could come up.
Thank you.
Chairman Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Co-Chair. So Jay, I think for the committee's benefit, there's probably some helpful background information. If you could talk a little bit about kind of Wyoming's history and the role of the AG's office, I think it's helpful for particularly new members to understand that not all states have attorney generals who are dedicated to defending natural resource cases like Wyoming. And so maybe some history on that, and then just a little bit of an overview of when we're talking about these listing cases, just so committee members start understanding what that process entails. So, I think anytime understand the concept of taking an animal, but you're talking about things that might alter critical habitat. And so if you could just kind of walk us through so we understand all of these issues a little bit better.
Okay, Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Ellis. As far as the first part of the question, in 2003, the Wyoming legislature enacted what was House Bill 300 in that session. And House Bill 300 amended some aspects of the Federal Natural Resources Policy Account statute, or FNRPA. But in a non-codified provision of House Bill 300, the legislature authorized 3 positions for the Attorney General's office with the idea that we would have some attorneys whose job it was to become involved in litigation with the federal government where federal natural resource policy affected the state of Wyoming, either good or bad. If it was something good, we would be involved supporting it. And if we didn't like it, we would be involved challenging it. So what we did with those 3 positions is we created 2 attorney positions and a paralegal position. And so, since that time, we have had attorneys who, through money that comes from FNRPA for the cost of litigation, are able to either file lawsuits in the name of the state of Wyoming or intervene in lawsuits all over the country in the name of the state of Wyoming to litigate issues. And it's evolved. When we first started, even though some of this litigation was already ongoing, when the HB 300 positions were created, we became very quickly involved through HB 300 in snow machines or snowmobiles in Yellowstone. Winter use in Yellowstone is another way to say that. The roadless area conservation rule, the delisting of the Prebles Meadow jumping mouse, gray wolf delisting. Over time, it's evolved where at times we're more involved in oil and gas related lawsuits or coal related lawsuits. But really any federal natural resource policy issue where the determination is made that some lawsuits that has been filed is going to affect the state of Wyoming. We have these 2 attorneys whose job it is to go litigate those cases. Now, as time has gone on and certain attorneys in those positions have taken other, in the HB 300 positions have taken other jobs in the office, we've actually managed, in my opinion, to build a pretty solid base of experience when it comes to this type of litigation. I believe I was the first HB 300 lawyer. They told me I was. I don't know if that's technically correct, but I only had the job for 18 months and then I moved out of that position into a different position in the office. But I've continued to do that litigation since 2005. James Castee, who's currently the deputy in our Water and Natural Resources Division, held the HB 300 job for a relatively short period of time, but as deputy of the Water and Natural Resource Division, he's continued to litigate cases in this HB 300 realm. So at any given time, we have, I would say right now, 4 attorneys, and pretty soon we'll have 5 attorneys available to do this type of work. But we have 2 attorneys that it is their full-time job to do it. So in terms of, I guess, Madam Chairman, Co-Chair Ellis, the second question.
Just a brief, so people understand when we're talking about ESA related, because these are all federal natural resource management issues. And to my former boss, I was an HB 300 attorney fresh out of law school years and years ago. I just want the committee to understand kind of the interplay you've mentioned, like you'll have National Forest Management Act, Endangered Species Act, NEPA, all these things. And so when we talk about ESA, if you could just talk a little bit more specifically about what goes into a listing and just that process and where we start jumping in, we as Wyoming in those various stages.
Okay, so really most of the work we've done with the Endangered Species Act has been with listing and delisting. Now, the Endangered Species Act, for a relatively short federal statute, covers a lot of ground in terms of permits that have to be obtained before you can do development in a critical habitat area, for instance. We haven't had a lot of issues dealing with that over the years. This Upper Green River Rangeland project case is my first experience with the biological opinion issue, and my recollection is we haven't had a lot of those. What we primarily have had with endangered species is listing and delisting cases, and the two cases, or the two species that everybody knows about, gray wolves and grizzly bears, but there's also been Prevost meadow jumping mouse was a listing, delisting case that we also dealt with. And so, with respect to, for instance, grizzly bears were listed in 1975. And so anything we've had to do with grizzly bears through HB 300 has strictly been delisting. And so in that context, basically, as the delisting process unfolds, the HB 300 attorneys are not involved in the administrative process. Game and Fish is actively involved with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But with respect to grizzly bears, both times that grizzly bears were proposed for delisting, it's my understanding that working together, the affected states, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and some other federal agencies who play an important role in habitat for grizzly bears, work together with the idea that grizzly bear numbers had recovered, and they would, for lack of a better way to say this, sua sponte, decide that grizzly bears would be delisted. And so in the 2007 delisting process, they worked together to come up with what is known as the conservation strategy, which is this post-management conservation measure that a number of signatories have signed on to, and basically agreed to work together to manage grizzly bears post-delisting. But in terms of getting the grizzly bear delisted, the ESA says to delist a species, you have to look at 5 statutory factors. And really with grizzly bears, and Director Nesbitt can correct me if I'm wrong here, the one factor has to do with the regulatory mechanisms that will be in place and administered by the state after delisting. That has been, of the 5 factors, that's been the one that has had most, if not all, of the focus. And so the conservation strategy incorporates the Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana grizzly bear management regs and plans by reference. And so with grizzly bears, it was determined it's time to try to delist them. The service requested that the states come up with certain regulatory measures to manage bears post-delisting. The states did that. Those were incorporated into the conservation strategy. We moved forward with the 2007 delisting. We lost in district court. We went up to Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we also lost there, but that was actually a fairly significant decision in my opinion, because coming out of that litigation, in my mind, really the only issue was the potential impact of a whitebark pine seed decline on the grizzly bear population. And so coming out of that litigation, that seemed to be the only issue that needed to be dealt with, because the Ninth Circuit actually was very positive about the conservation strategy. But as we move forward to the 2017 delisting, again, adequate regulatory mechanisms, one of the 5 factors was the key focus. And it turns out that the 3 issues that we lost on with respect to the 2017 delisting of the grizzly bear, 2 of them were regulatory mechanisms based issues. And one of them is just something the service has to do to explain their decision. And so, it wasn't a whole lot different with gray wolves. Gray wolves were reintroduced in the mid-90s, and the population grew faster than people expected. And so in the early 2000s, the service approached the states and said, hey, we think we can delist gray wolves. We want you to give us a management plan. And that was geared again towards the adequate regulatory mechanisms factor of the delisting factors. We produced a delisting, we produced a gray wolf management plan, and there was also a gray wolf management statute. And the service moved forward I'm sorry. I used to know this a lot better. I'm getting old. Actually, what happened in 2003 is we produced a gray wolf management plan and they rejected it. They said it wasn't good enough. And so to give you an idea of how delisting works, all of the other factors were in place and beyond dispute. Wolf numbers were beyond expectation. But because Wyoming wanted to manage wolves as predators outside of what we deemed to be and what the service deemed to be suitable wolf habitat, the service said your plan's not adequate, so we can't move forward. And so that spawned several rounds of litigation. The legislature made some changes. Game and Fish made some changes. And eventually we reached a point where the service was willing to accept our approach to management as being adequate. We moved forward, litigated that one final time a few years ago, and ultimately the court said that our approach was good enough. But really, when you think about how the delisting process works, the discussion doesn't start until the numbers are back. And then once the numbers are back, at least it seems to me as an outside observer, then once the numbers are back, it seems like the other parts of it fall into place. And it's just a question of how the species will be managed post-delisting so it doesn't go back on the list. Now, with respect to listing, it's the same process, just on the other side of the coin. If populations of a species is declining to the point where it will qualify as threatened or possibly endangered, they look at the same 5 factors that they look at with a delisting to determine whether that species should be put on the list. With respect to the Preble's Meadow jumping mouse, that species was put on the list before HB 300 existed, so that we dealt with it as a delisting. I have not dealt with a listing of a species issue in the 18 or so years I've been doing this. And I realize that's a bit of a disjointed presentation. I'd be happy to try to clarify that.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. If it's okay, can you give us an update with then sage grouse? And maybe that's a good segue to educate the committee about a warranted but precluded designation.
Madam Chairman, Chairman Ellis, I apologize, but because that is currently being litigated, I didn't get up to speed on that. I have not been directly involved in anything sage grouse, but I can get that information. I just don't currently have it.
We have the governor's office here too, so they can probably give us an update on that.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Co-Chair, just one last question or request. Can you write down the case names of the 5 that you mentioned? I just want to make sure that, we have those as a reference, and I think it is helpful for us to see who all the parties are in those that are named in that litigation. You mentioned that Alabama's taking the lead in one of the cases for, I'm sure, the states and the defendant interveners, just so we kind of know the landscape of who's out there and what's going on, and who the parties are.
Madam Chairman, Chairman Ellis, I will do that. I will admit, I wasn't referring to them by case name because with the changeover in administration, I'm not sure which courts have substituted in the new people. So I've got a bunch of different potential case names, but we'll figure out what the correct case names are now that people have been appointed, and we'll get those to you. And with the docket.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify, it's not that I'm worried about who has transitioned over for secretarial names.
No.
It's more what conservation groups are involved in what litigation and what states. So that's, I think, more the nature of my inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Yes, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in coal litigation, the conservation groups really make money either way, whether it seems their attorneys get paid. Is that the case with these type of lawsuits against multiple states? Do they get reimbursed through some funding mechanism by the federal government,
Mr. Jurdy.
even though they might lose?
Madam Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I'm not aware of a circumstance where a plaintiff can bring a lawsuit, lose, and be reimbursed by the federal government. Now, certainly in, for instance, Endangered Species Act litigation, When the conservation groups prevail there, they have the ability then to request attorney's fees from the Department of the Interior Fish and Wildlife Service. But the key to that is they have to be a prevailing party. So basically, they have to win.
Mr. Budd, would you care to speak to the sage grouse question?
Madam Chairman, I'll update you as much as I can. I think most people saw the announcement from Interior and BLM that they'll be reviewing the sage grouse plans yet again for the third time in 6 or 8 years now. That, as far as I understand, it was required by what happened with the court decision. And that goes back to sagebrush focal areas, which were analyzed in 2015, dropped in the 2019 plan. And then the court found, as far as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, but they said you didn't do an adequate analysis in 19. And so they have to go back and look at that again, is a very layman's version of what's going on. So Forest Service finished their objection process in 2019. We were a part of that, and mostly as an interested party, which is a whole separate conversation that I'd be happy to have with anybody that wants to. They haven't put out their final plan yet, but the next step for them will probably be litigation as well.
Thank you. Committee, further questions from the governor or for the governor's office? Yes, follow up.
Thank you. One more question. What are you worried about on the horizon? Because I remember when the white bark, I always get that wrong, the white bark pine seed. I remember that, you start hearing the rumblings that that's going to be a big issue. What are some of the issues that you're anticipating or kind of keeping an eye out for now?
Madam Chairman, from our office, I guess, and to backtrack a little if I could, the governor does have an endangered species account that similar to FNRPA, it's just a little different flavor. That goes to help fund things like the Wyoming Natural Diversity Database, which looks at invertebrates and plants and helps in terms of putting boots on the ground to monitor for those things. That is truly where I think there's a great amount of, it's a fear I have, I guess. And I think that the governor shares that. Invertebrates and plants, we have questionable authority over compared to vertebrates. What happens if you list the western bumblebee? And so there's a lot of things out there that are like that. The Fish and Wildlife Service actually about 2 weeks ago put out a new list of 3 threatened species, 2 of which were plants, one of which was a specific type of bee. Thankfully, we don't have either one of the plants in Wyoming. The bee is not suspected to be here. It could be found. And so I think that's it's a really strange part of the Endangered Species Act in terms of where the state plays a role with invertebrates, whether they're aquatic or terrestrial, and plants, whether they're aquatic or terrestrial. So that is where, and I'd let Director Nesbitt add anything if he had it.
Just one other species that's certainly out there that has not been a concern for Wyoming, but it has some potential for, I know there's a listing discussion about it right now, is little brown bat. And we do have little brown bats in eastern Wyoming. We don't have any concerns with their viability here, but a listing could affect us if it, based on populations in other states, because usually those listings are looked at, range wide. And unlike the grizzly bear, where there's distinct population segments, some of these other species don't have the same designation or the same legal definition.
So, Director, just on that note, if they were to list the little brown bat, what would the impact be to the state? What would that look like?
I don't know exactly yet on little brown bat what that might look like, Madam Chairman, but things like certainly anything on federal land, that any normal uses on federal land could be, if they're deemed a threat, could be subject to protections if they were listed. There are in the Endangered Species Act some impacts that could happen on private lands as well, if little brown bat are on private lands. And so those are all, basically different uses that could be identified as a threat in the listing could be an issue for Wyoming.
Senator Landon, did you have a comment or a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, anecdotally or otherwise, have you heard anything about predator birds? I'm actually hearing from my constituents up in the central part of the state about the lack of eagles and hawks, particularly in the Fremont Canyon area. I don't know if that's just anecdotal. I wonder if it's based on anything. Are your troops hearing anything on that front?
Madam Chairman, Senator Landon. No, actually quite the contrary. A lot of what I hear are people that are very concerned about
Okay.
eagle predation on livestock,
Right.
raven predation on livestock. And so, there have certainly been some places in the state where there's been ebbs and flows in what people see for those species. But across the entire state, we don't have concerns with golden eagles or other migratory birds at this point.
Well, I appreciate that. Good to know, and I can pass that along. Just seemed to be a little dip going on in that part of the world, and people wondering about developments down south of there and all sorts of things. Thank
My
you.
brother's got a bunch of eagles. He'll send their way if they're needing some.
Yeah, I was gonna say the best thing that we could do if we wanted to, from what I've been hearing the last couple of days, we just had the Animal Damage Management Board, Director Miyamoto and I did, and I think the best way to ensure that we end up with some eagles in Fremont County is to move some sheep down there, and they'll be there.
Sad but true. Further questions, committee? Yes, Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a couple of questions, if I might. The first one would be directed to Director Nesvik. Director, in your experience, especially with these big windmills flying around now, is that having much of an effect on eagles and ravens and that sort of thing? Do you have any insight as to that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Winter, there have been some concerns in the past, especially in some of the early wind developments. But there's been extensive research now, and when those things are permitted, they go through a pretty extensive process to have to monitor any take, and they have Mr. Jurdy referred to as these incidental take statements. There's certain levels of take that are permitted, and then they have to stop the activity. And so it's pretty tightly regulated. There have been some concerns with things like bats in those wind turbines. But as far as the big birds, the big birds covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, most of those impacts have been mitigated in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This next question would be directed to Mr. Budd. In your estimation, would the governor be receptive to sending a letter to the Department of the Interior, to the president, whoever, if this committee could come up with a letter that would help him or back him up to address this predator problem in the state of Wyoming, these grizzly bear predator problems?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter. Sorry, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I think we'd be open to that. I'm happy to have a discussion with you afterwards. We have written some in the past. I know Game and Fish has talked about it with them. It really is a pretty complicated issue, but be happy to discuss it more, so.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I can add a little bit to that. So the governor and I have had significant discussions, lengthy discussions about what the right answer is for grizzly bears. And at the end of the day, he's a very strong proponent for delisting. And so he's asked me to look at what all the options might be, considering the current administration and considering the recent court ruling on what steps Wyoming can take to try to make a course correction here and try to get us back on the path of delisting. And while it's complicated, he's been pretty clear in that we need to find some path forward where we're taking the step. And so there'll be more to follow on that, but this is on his radar screen, and it's at the top.
So Director, then what are the next steps? If the 2017 delisting, it had to do with the post-food source, correct? How long do we give it before we revisit that case and revisit the delisting?
Madam Chair, so there's really no way to take that case, appeal it any higher. I mean, there is, but it's probably not worth our investment because our chances of success are so slim. And in Endangered Species Act cases, the Supreme Court, doesn't oftentimes look at those cases. And I'll certainly defer to Mr. Jurd if he's got anything to add there. So really what we've considered our process and procedural type things the state can initiate, either direct consultation with the service to try to address the issues that the court brought up in a way that's amenable to the state of Wyoming, and doing it administratively through the service. Certainly our federal delegation has pulled out all the stops to introduce legislation again. I think this is the 4th or 5th time now that a member of our federal delegation has put something in place. And there's some other potential legal options as well that I can certainly discuss with you offline, but I wouldn't want to discuss them here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jurdy?
Actually, Madam Chairman, just be more specific about the case and where it's at. When the Ninth Circuit issued its opinion, the rules that apply to the process basically gave the state the option of asking the Ninth Circuit to reconsider the decision in what's called an en banc review, which is where they take, I think it's 13 judges to then review it internally within the Ninth Circuit. Or alternatively, we could have petitioned the United States Supreme Court to take the case on what's called certiorari. And we decided not to pursue either of those options. The case now is back actually in the district court. The district court's settling out the attorney's fees part of it.
Thank you. Committee, further questions? Well, we appreciate thank you, Mr. Jurdy, very much. This was enlightening. We appreciate you going over these cases and giving us so much time. And Director Nesvik, you as well. And Mr. Budd, thank you. And please thank the governor. We appreciate it. Mary Beth, do we have anybody else from the executive branch online that would like to address the committee?
Madam Chair, I don't see anyone else online unless Chief King has anything to add.
We just want to know if his son won his race.
I don't have anything to add and no race results yet. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chief King. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody in the room? We will take public comment at this point on all of our topic points at this point. So gentlemen, thank you. And if there's anyone in the room that would like to address the committee, yes, Mr. McGagna.
Madam Chair, just
Yes,
very
sir.
quickly there, I have had members of the committee inquire about our newest Inspire a Kid initiative with the Wyoming 100. It's a list of 100 activities that kids can engage
Yeah.
in and scratch off each time they.
Right. We all
complete it.
got one in the mail. Yes.
All right. Well, anyway, I know there's more requests for them, so there'll be a box of them right here at the door when you,
Okay.
there it is.
The Ellis kids are on top of it.
They are. So we'll put a box right over there. Take as many as you want.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate it. Thank you. Come on up, Mr. McGagna.
Soak in a hot spring.
And for the record, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim McGagnon with Wyoming Stockbrokers Association. My comment just briefly on 2 or 3 of the issues that have been on your agenda this afternoon. Certainly first and foremost, the issue of compensation for trophy game damages. And we engaged during this past legislative session with the bill that was brought forward, primarily because we were concerned that the bill in the form it was not really directing the issue and perhaps bring confusion to how our program operated. So we're very pleased that the department, the English department, has agreed to do an analysis of that entire program. We look forward to working with them. With regard to the specific issue that arose about the loss of yearling cattle to predators, I have since that time visited with a number of our members, both in Suffolk County area and in the Northern part of the Big Horn Basin with regards to that issue. And I sense that I'm getting, and we need to look at it much more, is that unlike calves, which are just difficult to find when they get killed, yearling cattle are not difficult to find in one sense because they're much larger. They're not that difficult. I believe what is somewhat different is the behavior of the animals. When a group of cows are threatened by a grizzly bear or wolf, they tend to travel together, they pull together. When a group of these young yearlings are impacted by predators, they tend to scatter very widely. And I'm sure that to some degree makes it more difficult to identify them. But at this point, I'm not prepared to say that there's a major difference there. I think there may be a factor that we could come up with. There would be a slight adjustment for yearlings, but I don't see it as dramatic such as we have with calves and with ewes and lambs. I think it's good to look at it for another reason that I think the whole program is good to look at. The formulas that are being used today, they weren't just pulled out of thin air. They were developed based on some analysis and research that was done on the impacts of wolves and then grizzly bears. A little bit in Wyoming, a lot of it in Montana. Sorry about that. And the time that analysis was done, the population of grizzly bears and wolves was only a small proportion of what it is today. So I think some new analysis to say what are those impacts given the current higher populations is timely. I don't think we need to move hastily on it, but I think that it's an issue that is deserving of some of our attention. And Game and Fish has been good for us to work with on that issue. So we're certainly open to continue to look at it. We're not at this point prepared to propose to the commission any changes specifically in the formulas that they currently have in place. With that, Madam Chair, I might move on to another issue of interest, and that's the elk feed grounds. And we were very supportive of the legislation passed this last session to say that only the governor can close a feed ground. I want to emphasize that that was not based on any distrust or lack of confidence in the Game and Fish Department or the commission in making the right decisions. It was really, from our perspective, based on the need to raise the profile of what the impact of elk feed ground closures would be on those interests that are most directly and immediately economically impacted, and that's the ranchers in those areas. And by raising that profile to the level of the governor, I think it strengthens the position of Game and Fish when they're dealing with the federal land agencies and with others to take the necessary steps to keep those feed grounds open. And I have to admit, we were somewhat nervous when the director announced that they were going to hold these public meetings on elk feed grounds. We're pleased with his assurance that it's not about closing feed grounds. It's just about pulling together public input, which is very valid. There are a lot of diverse interests out there. So long as we don't fail to recognize that there's one interest out there that is most directly and immediately economically impacted, and that's the livestock industry. And finally, Madam Chair, the one other issue I would mention, Mr. Jurdy talked about the 5 cases, and at least he mentioned this, and I would emphasize in 3 of those, perhaps even 4, I'm not sure as I sit here, we are involved as well as either interveners or having filed amicus brief in the cases. And I just want to express our appreciation for the state of Wyoming's engagement, because in each of those cases, it directly impacts our members. Our case is strengthened by having the state of Wyoming standing in there with us. And we appreciate that. And we want to work with them to continue that as we go forward, because I certainly don't see on the horizon any lessening of Endangered Species Act based litigation, rather probably an increase of it coming forward. And that partnership is valuable to us. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee, but just wanted to emphasize those points.
Mr. Magagna, thank you. We appreciate you taking the time to come before the committee. Questions for Mr. Magagna, committee members? Yes, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just 2 comments. One, thank you, Mr. Magagna. Your opinions are always welcome, always sought out, and always valued. Second, I just want to take a second personally to congratulate you on your award, your honorary degree from the university, another richly deserved award. And Appreciate all your work.
Well, I've appreciated the award and all, and I'm thankful that no one here today referred to me as Dr. McGagnon, because I've been having to deal with that for the past several days.
Yeah, well deserved.
Thank you, everyone.
Anyone else? Wait, we're getting off easy today. All right, with that, and nobody online, Mary Beth, I take it?
Madam Chair, no.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will close public comment. Committee, well done. It's 2:40. How about that? So did we have any ideas from this committee on further thoughts on any of the matters that we've discussed? I know Vice Chairman Newsom, you had a thought earlier in the day, or Representative Sweeney had one of these. Okay, go ahead, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So on the skill-based games, and some further language, taking back up Representative Walter's amendments that did not get passed, I think it would be good to look at that. I believe there's copies. And that we could supply. And I think if we could base off of that for possibly for LSO in this committee to look at for the next, for our next meeting, if that would suit the committee.
And Representative Sweeney, those amendments, if I recall, were to just expand the skills games, correct? Is that what you're referring to?
It was to better, thank you, Madam Chairman, to better define on the skill-based and not necessarily expansion, but that's part of that. But I do think there is possibilities within that amendment that the Gaming Commission actually can currently take action, but I would hope that this would further clarify that.
Okay, committee? Thoughts, comments on Representative Sweeney's suggestion?
Madam
you-
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Brody.
not to be a wet blanket here, but I just feel compelled to remind the committee that Management Council did make the decision to remove skill games from the interim topics that were approved for the committee and limit the committee's action to the implementation of sports wagering. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. And so what does the committee think about that? We're not supposed to address this, Senator Landon. We were not given that task. Yes, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So would that preclude us from taking a look at was it HB 56? I never remember if it's SF 56 or.
Senate file.
Yeah. Would it preclude us from taking a look at that and seeing if there's something in the language that could tweak that a little bit to help that situation without saying it's a skills game priority? Or am I barking up the wrong tree?
Mr. Brody, can we look at House Enrolled Act 50, AKA Senate File 56, as suggested by Senator Schuler?
Madam Chairman, not sitting on Management Council nor staffing that committee, I don't have a feeling for the I suppose, wiggle room that committees may have. I can tell you in my experience, the committees certainly do veer outside of interim topics on occasion. And it's certainly warranted for this committee to hear information from the Gaming Commission, as the Gaming Commission would fall under the jurisdiction of the TRW committee.
Thank you. Representative Jennings, you are the most senior member, I believe. No, Senator Landon is. So I would welcome the two of you to provide some insight to this committee, since we are wet behind the ears, some of us.
Well, Madam Chairman, I'm trying to choose words carefully. I think Management Council has taken on a little bit stronger role in in the past handful of years. In my first decade in the Senate, most of what was done during the interim was the work of the committees. And it really was not much of a top-down approach. And it has become more of that. And in addition to that, the Management Council, you've noticed that we've had quite a few bills from the Management Council over the past handful of years. That too was not as prevalent not that long ago. So all of that said, it feels like we have a little bit of flexibility to take up what we see as important to this committee. And worst case scenario, we take it up, we bring it, and leadership sits on a bill, or indicates that we shouldn't have done that. But I guess my counsel would be, if it's important enough that this committee votes to that importance, that would be good enough for me.
Thank you. Senator Guru? You're on Management Council, correct?
Oh,
Since
at the
we're-
moment.
So.
I
What say
am,
you?
although due to, powers that be, I won't be much longer, but I can give you some insight from the conversation as I heard.
Please do.
I think that at least what I heard the Management Council talk about was a desire to limit our conversation to the newest bill, the sports gaming bill. Had any members of the Management Council, maybe some were listening, had been in the room today and heard the testimony that we heard, may have felt differently. I know I did. And I would be interested as a member of Management Council who took a vote on that. Like I say, I'm getting thrown out, so you can take it for what it's worth. But I personally think that it would be fine. And I guess in my limited time here, but in the years I've probably been, I was on the committee that was probably the single largest violator of the ranging subject matter from what Management Council directed to what the committee did. That was appropriations last year. And it was even cited as such, so it wasn't me saying it. So I think that the chairs have a little more discretion, but then you'd have to take that up with your leadership.
Thank you. Representative Jennings, do you have any thoughts? Representative Hunt? Former Chairman Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that just on the whole, that from a practical perspective, from a common sense perspective, that the committees have enough independent leeway and an independent thought process to take things as they come. And as long as we're not coloring so far outside the lines as to be coming up with just random arbitrary issues. I think that collectively as a committee, as something comes along during the interim, if something comes up in discussion, even though it was not specifically on the list assigned by Management Council, if the committee as a whole feels that it is worthwhile to look into and pursue and potentially put legislation together, then I think it should do that. I think that and I'd say Senator Landon's right. There's been a bit more of a crackdown from leadership and Management Council the last year or two, but I also think that the committees need to be free thinking enough to act and react accordingly as issues come up and as situations develop throughout the year. Otherwise, it's not a very practical approach. And so, the worst then no offense to leadership and Management Council, but the worst the Management Council can do, or the worst the leadership can do, is if the committee brings forward a bill that they really don't think was within the purview of the committee's topics, they can just stuff it in the drawer. But I think that, like I say, I think that we should all vote on that as a committee. But if we feel that it's worth pursuing, I see no reason we shouldn't. So, thank you.
Thank you. And my apologies for overlooking you. I still consider you to be wet behind the ears since you've been a legislator since you were in high school. You have a lot of experience. I appreciate that. Thank you. Representative Jennings, you care not to weigh in on this?
Sure, I'll weigh in, Madam Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. So I would certainly agree here that we, as a committee, and not being one that's overly regarded management council's decisions or agreed with them, although I'm not a chairman, so you guys have to deal with that part. But I would remind the committee, this is taking up of a bill that failed. And so there's a real possibility that we're just going to waste our time again. There could be aspects of it that could be brought and looked at from an individual standpoint. But if the committee so chooses to go that way, I think they do. We were all elected. So. And
Thank
before.
you. Co-chairman, you're the rabble rouser. What are your thoughts?
I appreciate that. So I was the one who presented to management council. I was the one trying to defend it to keep it on there. And so, you know, we do walk this delicate line of being respectful of our leadership. Those elected to management council are appointed to serve on that committee. You know, I think that where I'm struggling with everything is we have a lot of cleanup work to do. I think we heard that. We need to be responsive to our constituents, and you know, as long as we produce good work product, which I think that we have a really great committee. I'm excited about all the ideas and work and questions, all your engagement these last couple of days. I think we can come up with good work product. But I just want to acknowledge, like, this wasn't just kind of something that grew without, I mean, this was a direct ask in a vote that was no, it was a close vote. I think it was within one vote of whether or not to keep up skill games. I think we have a duty to make sure we get gaming right. It's here. It's a very, you know, it is a controversial topic. There are people who really don't like it. And then there are people who are willing to, who enjoy it. And, you know, my perspective is it needs to be done safely and fairly so that citizens have confidence in how we administer our gaming regulatory framework. I don't know that can wait. I mean, this is a lot of new industry for Wyoming, and I just would hate to kick the can and assume that nothing bad's going to happen. We're not going to see, you know, criminals start infiltrating our state. This happens in other states, so we do need to be mindful of that. So, but for it being such a very time to me sensitive issue, I do think we should continue to ask and see how we can do it better. And to the extent too that we're supporting our commission. That was a question I've asked is, you know, we've thrown a lot at a group of private citizens who are very comfortable administering a live horse racing program. And that's changed. And we should probably know whether or not they feel comfortable with how that has all been shaking out, or if there's a different way. So, you know, I'm certainly happy to keep working on it, and just appreciate your feedback. And to that point, though, if there's anyone here that really doesn't like objecting to a management council vote, that would be helpful to know too. I really don't want that voice to be silent, or your voice to be silenced if that's your sentiment. So Representative Jennings.
Madam Chair, ladies, so I guess my question to that, because I don't have any problem voting against management council. My question though is, would we be looking at a bill draft of which we've not taken testimony of, or are we saying that we're going to look at this topic in our next meeting? So I guess my question is if I could have a little more definition as to what we would be voting on.
Madam Co-Chair, you know, I didn't bring a motion. I think it was Representative Sweeney, and I think it was maybe looking at some of the Walters amendments. You know, we have a meeting in August and then later in the fall. So we do have 2 meetings. I mean, it could be just as we've done with a few other issues, maybe we're gathering more information between now and August, but in August, the acknowledgement that if we want something to change, you need to have reached out to folks and start working an idea if you've got one, but maybe that's a solution.
Madam.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So this would be a amendment. It certainly is not a whole new bill. Just to clarify the good work that was done on Senate File 56. Is it 56? And that would simply be what we could take a look at our next meeting or our last meeting, but is what I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting trying to rewrite everything and the extensive work that was done by the co-chair. And I did not come to this meeting with anticipating this until the last testimony that has compelled this. And so it strictly is up to your pleasure. And I have never resisted management council. I would have a hard time voting against management council and going rogue. So, yeah, so.
Yes, sir.
I do have the same cautions that have been expressed by Representative Jennings and then a little bit by Representative Sweeney in that I think what came up today is important enough that we pursue it. I think I may have a little trouble supporting if we launch headlong into a major effort on the gaming front. I guess I'm prepared during this interim to tweak a couple things to encourage our commission to do what we asked it to do earlier today, but then just let the horses lope a little bit here before we spur the horse again. I guess I would caution getting into too deep a water on this because we've got lots of other things to be concerned with too. So hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 2 more meetings. Maybe having our leadership on this joint committee, just talking to management council and get their views. And we have plenty of time to bring Representative Sweeney's ideas at the next meeting. If management council feels it's worthwhile, you can certainly fill them in on why some of us want to address it. But if you feel that there's just a closed door, then we're not wasting time. So.
Good idea. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the engagement, committee. So, Mr. Brody, if you could give us just kind of a rundown on what our task is as chairman and before our next committee and just an overview of our day. Unless the committee, excuse me, Vice Chairman Newsom, did you have a?
Is it appropriate now to bring my
Oh,
idea?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
What I would like to do is look at, have the Gaming Commission and maybe some of us look at how the Gaming Commission is appointed. As I look at their website, it's 7 members geographically, and then 1 member from the tribe, and then 1 member from law enforcement at this point. And that may well be the correct mix, but I think that they're possibly, given the additional charges that we've given to them, might be wise to look at membership based on a skill set or a knowledge set. And I think it would be wise for Director Moore and his team to maybe give us a report as to how the commission could be structured differently. Or something like that.
I'll second the motion.
Was it a motion?
Yeah, it was apparently.
All right. So if you could you kind of just paraphrase that maybe for Mr. Brody's sake?
To direct Director Moore to get with his commission, possibly shouldn't be in a motion, but I would like to see maybe 2 members from this committee serve with Director Moore to look at, to possibly restructuring how the Gaming Commission is appointed, and to see if it's wise to add, not add members, but appoint members that have a special skill set.
Okay.
That was done very badly, and I apologize.
So it's been moved by Representative Newsom and seconded by Senator Landon and Mr. Brody. Is it necessary for us to request that, or could that be included in the work that the co-chairman and I plan to do in terms of a letter sent to the commission addressing some of these issues? Could we also make that request as well?
Madam Chairman, I would recommend that since the committee is already sending a letter on that other issue, that it just be a letter with two parts, one including the request that I guess, be a working group, so to speak, to explore this idea of having the commission perhaps be a knowledge-based appointment commission.
Okay, yeah, and the only reason I mention that is the commission really, their plate is so full right now. I think the last thing they would want is to try to have to revisit that, but maybe we can get it in front of them so they can be thinking about that maybe in a future date.
And I would agree that this is future planning. This is not something that needs to happen this year, next year. But this is something that if we're going to put more and more on the Gaming Commission's plate, we need to look carefully at who sits on that commission and the skill sets they bring.
Okay, thank you.
Then I had one more.
You clear on that then?
Madam Chair, I would agree with Representative Newsom. Looking at how other states and, you know, the NIGC, I don't mean to talk about that entity all the time, but there are some concepts that we need to start folding in. I mean, if these games are going to be here, but I fully acknowledge the commission is overwhelmed right now with activity. They need to catch up. We have a lot of catching up to do. But that said, like, we also as committee members can be setting the stage for, you know, really understanding what we want and what works for the best for commissioners and the commission itself. And so it's a good idea for us to keep working and educating ourselves.
Thank you. So, oh, go ahead, Vice Chairman Newsom. Go ahead.
The second thing I had was as we look at how to fund the outdoor initiative from state parks, is that maybe we invite the lottery here and explore adding scratch tickets to what they can sell. At this point, scratch tickets are exempted from what they can sell. And I would like us to explore that. As I understand it, the original reason for scratch tickets being excluded from their what they could sell, and maybe some of you were in on these discussions, was that they didn't want that instant gratification. So now we have skill games, which is instant gratification. We have historic horse racing, which is instant gratification. So I think we should look at lottery to help support the outdoor initiative. And so if we could invite lottery here for our next meeting.
I think that's a great idea, Vice Chairman Newsom. Committee, do you concur? Right, so Mr. Brody, if we could add that to the list too, and maybe make sure our lottery folks are at our August meeting to discuss this option. Thank you. And so just if you could give us an overview of the day, and that would be terrific.
So Madam Chairman, just as far as a work product standpoint, I'll be working with the chairman, the Madam Chairman, and drafting a letter to the Gaming Commission. The first part of that letter will be to ask the commission to do what's within its power to rectify the difficulties that are going on with certain operators in the state and other maybe litigious issues that may be on their plate. The second part of that would be to perhaps start exploring the idea of putting together a working group with a couple members of this committee to, I guess, further look at how the commission should be appointed, if there should be an element, or in its entirety should be based on a skill set rather than their location. Second, the chairwomen, we're going to visit with Select Water, is my understanding, to see if they were going to be amenable to using their infrastructure emergency account for possible use in an AIS emergency situation. And just, I believe, maybe report back to the committee on the results of those conversations. And then lastly, LSO is going to draft a bill in preparation for August that will impose strict liability upon
basically boat owners that fail to get permits, or excuse me, fail to get their boats inspected, and who later have visited a waterway that is affected by an AIS outbreak. And we'll have that bill ready for your consideration in August.
Okay.
That's the sort of to-do list, so to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. I appreciate that. Okay, and one other thing, committee, and this is the last committee meeting for Mary Beth. And she's not leaving Wyoming or Cheyenne. She's moving on to other work. But we will miss her. She's done a great job with LSO. And just so you know, she was so perfect for this committee because Mary Beth is an avid hunter. Well, you wouldn't know it, but her latest conquest was a turkey. So if you're interested, she has photos. But she's a bow hunter and a hunter, and she's an amazing woman. So we wish you all the best of luck. All right. Committee, any other comments, questions? Our next meeting will be August. Representative Winter, yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Would I be out of order in requesting the approval or the direction from this committee to work with the Game and Fish Department and the governor's office to prepare a letter of some sort to our congressional delegation and whoever to visit this predator reimbursement problem in our state?
Representative Winter, I'm speaking on for myself. No, I would welcome that committee. I think that's most in line. We appreciate you doing that.
I'll try to do that by next meeting then.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Okay, our next meeting will be August 26th and 27th in Lander. It depends though, LSO, do we have a site in Lander that meets the criteria for a virtual meeting?
At this point, I don't believe we've been able to identify a location that has the infrastructure necessary for the hybrids that we've all grown used to. The nearest is in Riverton at the college.
Okay, so just bear that in mind. It probably will be Riverton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think, we talked about maybe visiting the Trails Building in Lander, so we'll do our best to make that all work. But yes, just an FYI, that's what some of the issues we'll work through.
Good work, committee. This is a great committee. And I just got to tell you how much I appreciate the comments and the engagement. It's really important. And we've addressed some pretty serious issues for the state of Wyoming. And so thank you all for your work. Thank you, and have safe travels home, everybody. Thanks to executive branch